In 1969, a group of astronauts changed the world. They walked on the moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
In 1972, our journey ended. We've never been back. 2010 begins a year of change. Private companies are working on next-generation spaceships. Governments are looking to go back to the moon and on to Mars. It's time to look up and dream again. It's time to push humans into the cosmos. It's time to educate and engage the planet. It's time for Spacevidcast.
Welcome to Spacevidcast Live, 311 for Friday, March 26, 2010. My name is Benjamin Higginbotham. With me is beautiful and talented Carrie Ann Higginbotham. We'll be your hosts this evening. And we've got a bunch of new things we're trying out this evening. One of them is both a standard def and a high def feed.
Yes.
So if you're watching live right now, you can watch in high def by going to spacevidcast.com. Or if you want to watch the standard def, you can go to spacevidcast.com/live. And the reason we're doing that is because STS-131 is right around the corner, and this thing is going to be epic. There are only 4 remaining shuttle flights on the left, ever. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone was able to watch this, not just people who wanted to see it in high def. So we're starting to test
that
it
and
out.
Dave Maston's in Florida right now for the launch.
So he demanded standard def.
He was having issues, so we had to do something for him.
What are you going to do when Maston says, I want standard def? You make standard def?
You make it go.
With STS-131 right around the corner, we thought it would be wise to make a little promo video. So here you guys go. STS-131 is scheduled for launch April 5th this coming month. I mean, we're what is this, like a week and a half away, something like that?
Yeah.
Not that long away, and that's going to be pretty cool. So you can watch that live right here on spacevidcast.com hopefully in both standard def and high definition, right here, right here on this screen, as it were. And also coming up in early April, we've got Yuri's Night. That's April 12th. 18th?
Well, April 12th is the day that Yuri went into space in 1961. So there's that. But
that ends up being a week.
It's like a Monday or something like that. So the big events, the big Yuri's Night parties are actually happening on the 10th and 11th, the weekend prior to that. And so we are going to be on live for about 37 hours straight.
For an undetermined amount of time. We'll let you know how long we're going to be on next week. But check that out. That's going to be cool. We're going to have a global video cast, and our goal is to jump from time zone to time zone around the world and bring you Yuri's Night parties from all over the planet for one of the coolest, one of the biggest milestones in human spaceflight, the first human.
So you guys
spaceflight.
can see how people are partying over in Venezuela, and how people are partying in the Netherlands, and how people are partying in China, and all over the place, and in their each time zone. It should be very, very cool.
Most space geeks already know the name Robert Pearlman. His name's synonymous with space collector items and even with the space program as a whole. Robert knew what he wanted to do at a very young age. He'd been to space camp no fewer than 6 times.
Robert Pearlman in West Orange, New Jersey.
Hi, could you tell me what you're going to tell your friends about coming to Space Academy this week?
It's the best experience of my whole life. I mean, I really wanted to become an astronaut. This is like fulfilling my dream.
Back in the mid-90s, Robert created the Ask an Astronaut website to help connect the general public to those who'd flown in space. He's also helped the National Space Society, as well as Buzz Aldrin, develop and design their websites before starting the astronaut-endorsed Spaceport.com, which was then later acquired by Space.com. Robert's been on-air talent for the National Space Day webcast, which was filmed annually from the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, and was later hired by Space Adventures as their marketing and public relations director. Today, Robert is a well-sought-after expert on space history and runs the awesome collectSPACE.com website. He's very, very well-versed in spaceflight of old, as well as new space markets just forming. And it's our pleasure to welcome Robert Pearlman on the show as a guest tonight. Robert, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
You know, you are one of the few people who can not only talk about space of old, you know, all the way back to where human spaceflight began, but also all the way up to bleeding edge new space stuff that's coming out.
The space of tomorrow.
The space of tomorrow. So let's just get started. How did you get started in all of this? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
As you saw in that video, I haven't had an interest in space exploration since a very young age. I think I was 6 when I first expressed to my parents an interest and idea about being an astronaut. And I was fortunate to go to space camp 6 times, which really solidified my desire to want to be part of the space program. I basically crafted my education towards joining the NASA Astronaut Corps, but a chronic illness got in the way, and so I looked around to see what else I could be doing, and I really enjoyed writing, and the web was starting just about then. While other people were building websites, and back then, to call them websites was probably being generous, but building sites, pages to show off their hamsters or their girlfriend, I decided to build a space website. And it ended up being one of the first to be online for that wasn't a NASA site, but was related to space exploration.
Right.
And that sort of got me down on the base level, or the foundation, to start building websites for other space organizations like the National Space Society, and then later Space Adventures. I built Buzz Aldrin's first website long before his Dancing with the Stars days, and then went on and built the Educator's Guide for Tom Hanks' From the Earth to the Moon miniseries on HBO. And in 1999, I was working for Space.com after they had acquired a website that I helped start, Starport.com, and I wanted a place to put some of my own artifacts online as I was getting ready to move, and I created collectSPACE.com. Why I gave it the name collectSPACE is a little bit of an interesting story, in that I wanted it to be called SpaceMemorabilia.com. Went to register it and found out that astronaut Pete Conrad had just registered the domain, and then just a week later was unfortunately tragically killed. In a motorcycle accident.
Right.
And so I had written down on a piece of paper the words collect and space, and they were on opposite sides, and I just happened to glance down and saw it named collectSPACE, and registered the domain. Someone found it after I put it online and said, "How are you going to do more of this?" And it grew from a hobby site into now my full-time profession.
How big is collectSPACE? I mean, what has it grown into today?
Well, we have an average monthly readership of about 250,000 readers. We syndicate our articles out to Space.com, and then through them out to MSNBC, Fox News, and Yahoo News. So we have a combined readership of about 1.5 million per month. We have 35,000 registered members. From about 1999 through 2005 or 2006, we were really focused only on space memorabilia. And then I started to hear a request from the space history community saying they didn't have a site where they could get together and talk about space events from a space history perspective. And so we expanded to cover all of space history, both past, present, and future in the making, and married the two communities. And it's grown into the only community online where you can find former mission controllers and former astronauts talking with their fans, and then authors doing research for books, and even recruiting authors for books. There's this whole series coming out from the University of Nebraska Press that's been published over the last couple of years called Outward Odyssey. And most of the authors were recruited from the collectSPACE readership, and that was their first book that they've written. And there's one coming out about the Apollo 11 mission in a couple of weeks now that it has contributors from all across the collectSPACE audience.
Nice.
You know, there are a couple things in the chat room I want to touch on because you've got so much great information. One person asked, where do you get your stuff that you sell or at least you collect on collectSPACE? Where do you find all that stuff?
Well, to clarify, we used to sell space artifacts and space memorabilia through a partnership with a company called Countdown Creations. About 3 years ago, we stopped doing that, mostly because Countdown Creations became part of the Space Store Network, and then the Space Store Network took over what we call Buy Space on the site as an advertising arrangement. So we don't sell memorabilia any longer, but our members have the opportunity to buy and sell and trade memorabilia on our message boards. For the archives that we have on the site and the museum pieces that we do loan out to museums, we currently have artifacts in both Space Center Houston here in Houston, Texas, and also up at the Kansas Cosmosphere for the Apollo 13 anniversary coming up. But for artifacts such as this one, which is a space shuttle glove, we've bought them at auction. We've acquired them directly from NASA. I've had the fortune to do some business with some astronauts, former astronauts, that have picked up pieces from their collection. And then over the years, through collectors that have read the site, I've been able to pick up pieces as well. And so we do have a almost museum here at the home office for collectSPACE.
That's really cool. And I just want to, you hold up the astronaut glove like, oh, hey, I've got an astronaut glove here. But that's a big deal. That is not something that that's an actual astronaut glove, right? I mean, that's a real life shuttle EVA suit glove.
It's now I'll show one little hint here. It is it's only the outer layer. There's no pressure garment. This glove, the outer layer that would have protected from micrometeorite impacts, came from the early space shuttle program. It is, if you can see, it's kind of dirty and it's ripped in areas. Well, that's because it may have actually flown once. We don't know, but when it went from pristine to this, it was used for training in the neutral buoyancy lab, the underwater lab that's used to simulate weightlessness. And so it was underwater for many years, and then once it couldn't be used any longer, it was retired and scrapped. And then that's how we picked it up.
Now, for the space noobs out there, just to clarify, the gloves are actually very, very complicated because you need to have full motion of your fingers. And so there are multiple layers that go on the glove, and they actually will custom stitch and design the gloves for the astronaut wearing them. And that's the outer layer that would go on top of all that. Correct?
Indeed. This is sort of a one-size-fits-all. Well, not one-size-fits-all. There's multiple sizes, but the inside layer is what they'll customize so that it fits directly onto the person's hand, and that part won't be reused. But this part would be like a medium and would be worn by anyone who had a medium-sized hand.
I like how they just have a medium-sized glove on a spacesuit. You read that, like hangers of spacesuits and going through. What other cool artifacts do you have that, are just neat? We don't have that many guests that have just cool stuff laying around.
Well, not just cool, but your favorite stuff. Because sometimes it's something that would be cool to us isn't necessarily. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
I do. One of my favorite pieces is this, and I'll bring it up to the camera here so we can get a better shot.
Oh yeah.
So it's a package of food, and it flew on Apollo 11 on the first lunar landing mission. It's actually bread cubes It's been signed since by Buzz Aldrin and by Michael Collins at the top here. It was Michael Collins' bread cubes, and you can tell that from the back here because it's got a little piece of Velcro, and it's white Velcro. Each of the crew members had color-coded Velcro. The commander had red, the lunar module pilot had blue, and the command module pilot had white.
Interesting.
So Michael Collins, being the command module pilot, had white Velcro. And so these, what I like about them is that they represent something that shouldn't have come back to Earth. They should have been eaten. And then and they represent humanity. This is what, as most basic level, we need to eat to survive. And so this is, as one person put it, they're now croutons. They're not they're not bread cubes. I would never open this and eat it.
Right.
But I do like them. And this was an eBay find. Wow. I found this on eBay. A number of years ago, before eBay became really, really popular.
Right.
So, but it was a great little find.
Was it already signed on eBay, or did you have it signed?
No, I added the signatures. Speaking of food, this is a Coke can that was developed for spaceflight. This is a prototype can.
Love it.
Now, you can't take a regular Coke can into space, because if you do, and you were just to crack it open, the carbonation in the bottle would cause the soda to just jet out like an engine. And if you were either you were holding the can and all the soda would come out, or you would let go of the can and you'd have some a nice little propulsion device where it would just so that's how so they developed this and my earpiece is falling out, excuse me.
No problem.
They developed this can to try to address that. It had a valve. You would unscrew the top here and take off the top, and then you would be able to open up the valve and drink through this little tip here.
Right.
Unfortunately, it didn't hold the carbonation in very well, and so they found that it was that the soda was mostly stale by the time they uncarbonated by the time they drank from it. So then later flight, Coke came up with their next version, which is this.
I can't believe Coke is developing product for space. How cool is that?
It almost looks like a rocket in the middle, too. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Now, this was only one half of the system. This is the cup that would be filled with the soda. As you can see, there's a valve up here, and there was a large dispenser, and they could, and the astronauts could connect this into the dispenser and choose the type of soda they wanted. They had Diet Coke, Coke, and then also Sprite, I believe, or 7-Up, whichever is the 7-Up, the Coca-Cola product, and then like a Fanta type orange drink, and they could fill it up. And the idea here was that the cup would hold in the carbonation and the syrup and allow you to be able to drink from it without losing the carbonation. It worked better, but it wasn't perfect. But this was towards developing having a Coke dispenser on the International Space Station, which unfortunately never occurred.
Right.
But this was this was the most advances they got towards flying that. And why I like these things, and I mentioned it before, is I really like demonstrating to people that humanity's culture has entered space. That it's not just about having the right stuff and being almost robotic up in space. It's part of bringing who we are with us as we go out into the solar system, and I don't think anything better represents the American culture than having Coca-Cola in space.
It's also going to be kind of necessary. If we're truly to make space commonplace, we're going to need to be able to get mere mortals up into space. And companies like Virgin Galactic, they're a good first step. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think, well, I would at least, and I assume most others, I would like to spend a night at a space station or something else. And
wake up to Starbucks.
And well, right, I'm willing to do it and do whatever it takes. But a lot of people, if they went up there and they was like, okay, well, you get your Starbucks in the morning, you can have your Coke, because I like my Coca-Cola,
and
that's
my Egg
cool.
McMuffin.
Exactly, right?
So that's part of it. I used to work for Space Adventures, and we, the early adopters, the ones that are going up now, what we call space tourists, but are really not. They're private astronauts, privately funded astronauts, guys like Richard Garriott, Dennis Tito, Mark Shuttleworth. They train for 6 months. They're essentially cosmonauts that are going up there, well trained. They don't have as long training period because they're up there for only a week or 2 weeks at a time. But the average Joe or Jane who's going to buy a $200,000 or more expensive ticket when they get to space are after the early adopters and the space geeks are out of the way, are going to want some of the creature comforts of home, especially if you're going to a commercial space station.
Right.
And so looking for ways to bring what they feel comfortable with up in space becomes an important consideration. For everything from how do you go to the bathroom in space, an old favorite question of the astronauts, to bringing stuff like Coca-Cola or Starbucks or having enough coffee. I mean, even the Expedition 1 crew, Bill Shepard famously wrote in his journal about how they ran out of coffee during Expedition 1 aboard the International Space Station, and that he would search through pantries to try to find just one more bag of coffee because it would help him get through the day, and relish when a Progress resupplier or a space shuttle got up there to deliver more coffee. And that's the human factor of space exploration, of making sure that not only are we up there to do science and do the research that is necessary and the exploration, which is exciting, but also making sure that we remember who we are.
Right, right.
When do you think, in your personal opinion, when do you think that'll be? Because one of your goals as a kid, and one of my goals, is to go up into space. I don't necessarily need to be a government astronaut working in space and building things, but I want to go to space. When do you think that mere mortals like us will not only be able to do a suborbital flight, but maybe something in LEO or maybe even something on the moon? Do you think that'll happen in our lifetime?
Well, when I started with Space Adventures in 1996, I don't think anyone in the company expected orbital tourism as it now exists. Tourism in quotes, to occur as fast as it did. That opportunity came about because of some very good foresight by guys like Richard Garriott, who saw potential with first the Mir space station and then the International Space Station. I think that suborbital tourism through a company like Virgin Galactic or through X-Corp Aerospace on the edge of space and then eventually into space, we're just on the verge of it happening. It's hard to pinpoint a year. I would say it's within the next 5 years, but I used to say in 1996 that it was within 5 years.
Right.
So so I've stopped giving a time frame of how long, but I think we're on the verge of it happening. Spaceship Two, the VSS Enterprise, just made its first captive carry flight under White Knight 2 or VMS Eve, as they're calling it. And so they've begun their test program. It was a much longer flight than I think anyone anticipated outside of the program. It lasted, I think, almost 3 hours. And so they're definitely pushing to get that test program underway and get it done so that they can safely take passengers to space. Then to go into low Earth orbit, I think a lot of it has to do with what happens over the next few months and what is decided about NASA's own future in terms of whether NASA is going to follow the president's proposal of investing in a commercial crew launch industry, because that will accelerate the process that would allow the average individual to go as well. If we go a different direction, if the president decides that he's heard the feedback from Congress and from industry and decides that we need to go towards pushing for a heavy lift vehicle or another government vehicle, it may not take as long as it once did, because you have companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin out there who are developing with their own money, but it may take longer because they do not have the government as a customer.
Right.
So what's your own personal feeling right now? Because if you were to go back a month, my feeling would have been, okay, well, this is the course that NASA is going to go now, the proposed fiscal year 2011 stuff. But as I put my ear to the ground and listen a little bit more and more, it's kind of like, well, it feels like the president may compromise on some of this stuff. Maybe they'll pull Orion back.
Right.
Maybe they'll develop a heavy lifter like Ares 5. What's your personal gut instinct? Not saying that you know what's going to happen, but if you were a betting man and you had to bet on something, what do you think would actually occur?
If I was a betting man, I wouldn't bet. But I think that there will be a compromise of some sort, because because of the feedback that has happened from Congress. I actually was kind of surprised at the amount of objection there was to the proposal, to the fiscal year 2011 budget. I don't think that anything that was proposed by President Obama is absolutely new. We've been talking about going towards commercial crew for years. In fact, President Bush proposed commercializing, or at least privatizing, parts of the space shuttle operation before the Columbia accident. And so we've been talking about that type of direction for years. We've talked about using more advanced technologies for years, and some of those technologies are just reaching the point where a serious government investment, could make them a sustainable technology for pushing outwards into the solar system. So from that perspective, I don't think that that the proposal was that earth-shattering, but I think it came at a bad time when we're shutting down the space shuttle program, that we were facing some renewed interest or new interest from other countries. I think there was this desire to see us pushing forward faster than we could. And I was a fan of Constellation. In some ways, I'm still a fan of Constellation. I thought the architecture could have worked and may still work if they decide to go that way, but it was underfunded, and that was the real shame. Listening to NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden sitting in front of an appropriations committee, hearing the appropriations committee come back and say that you need to push forward with Constellation, it struck me that we're sitting here listening to them talk about something that they didn't fund for the past number of years. Mm-hmm. And if they had, we wouldn't be in this situation. Mm-hmm. And the same thing's true with the space shuttle shutting down. We're hearing, this talk about, well, we want to extend space shuttle. Well, we've been talking about shutting down space shuttle since right after the Columbia accident, since 2004. So you would have hoped that these decisions were hashed out earlier, and they haven't been. Right. So I think that there will be a compromise. I think that we'll see something on the order of possibly one or more space shuttle flights being added to the manifest, at least one, because there's hardware to fly that one flight, and maybe something along the lines of a shuttle-derived heavy lift vehicle being considered quicker than the current proposal exists. But in terms of Orion, I'd love to see Lockheed Martin step up and say, or any of the aerospace companies say, let's take what has been learned from Orion and develop a commercial vehicle based on it, and then fly it on many different vehicles. Why don't we make it so that you can put a capsule on top of Delta IV, on top of Atlas V, on top of Ariane, on top of to even draw this out to where it's not really realistic, but on top of Soyuz and on top of a Proton, mm-hmm. that you could have one capsule fits all with an adapter. That could be flown on many different vehicles, on top of Falcon 9 and on top of Orbital's Taurus, that would allow us to have multiple paths into space. Because of what Columbia taught us, we've learned any lesson from the Columbia accident in 2003, it's that we need to have multiple pathways into space to assure access for our astronauts and for all the world's astronauts.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that the brilliant part behind the new proposed plan, though, is that there would be multiple pathways. Now we've got consumer space companies developing multiple rockets concurrently, as opposed to NASA, who really only has the funding to develop one at a time. I realize Constellation had Ares 1 and Ares 5, but they were building Ares 1, and then they were going to build Ares 5. Whereas under the new plan, we'll have SpaceX building something, Blue Origin building something, other companies building stuff all concurrently. And let's just say we get 6 companies total and half of them fail. That's 3 rockets. That's 2 more than what NASA would have been able to develop in the same amount of time.
I think it's that failure rate that is what it concerns most people. Mm-hmm. That you're putting a lot of faith into something that doesn't exist yet. And so some of it exists. SpaceX has a Falcon 9 ready to fly next month, but it's the first flight. And so it's the idea of trusting that those companies will be ready to pick up the baton when we're ready to pass it to them. And that may be what is causing the most concern as we look forward. I don't think anyone I've talked to, even those who really support the Constellation program going forward and returning to the program of record, object to the idea of commercial crew being developed concurrently. allowing them to go forward, and when they're ready to fly or when they're ready to take NASA business, then allow NASA to take business. But their main objection seems to be that they don't want to put all their eggs in their basket, even though there are multiple baskets.
But it's a money issue, right? I mean, these private companies are going to be getting funding from NASA essentially to help develop these vehicles. I don't think NASA can't even fund their own constellation program. How are they going to help fund development of Falcon 9? Not that they've done some. How are they going to help fund,
Right.
SpaceX and Blue Origin?
That's the idea behind the $6 billion in the president's proposal over the next 5 years, that NASA would be providing funds to some of the commercial companies that would compete for that contract, and then you would have this guarantee, this knowledge that NASA would be your customer when you were ready to fly, and so so that the company could feel assured to invest its own money and find investors in themselves to be able to then have a return on their investment because they had the government as a paying customer, and so that would be the carrot that would be waiting for them when their spacecraft is ready. I think that the money issue is that at the end of the day, what all space advocacy or advocates should be saying is that we really shouldn't be in this position. NASA should have a large enough budget to be able to develop heavy lift vehicles and its own crew launch system and invest in commercial. But we're living in an economy right now that's just not realistic, or at least not realistic from Capitol Hill's perspective.
It feels like this could be the next big economy. I mean, it feels like space could be it. There's the options for space-based solar power. There's a ton of near-Earth objects that we could go and mine. Could we turn this around and say, you know what, this is how we're going to help recover our economy? Do you think that's an option, or is it just too expensive?
I think that there are major opportunities in space, but it is when I worked at Space Adventures, there was something we called the giggle factor. When I would get up on stage in 1996 at conferences and talk about sending tourists into space, people would literally laugh and say that's science fiction and walk out of the room. Dennis Tito's flight sort of changed in 2001, sort of got rid of that giggle factor. But today, when you have politicians talk seriously about developing space solar power or finding resources on the moon or in the asteroids or going to Mars, there's still that giggle factor, and it's not even a giggle factor because people aren't laughing; they're just not taking it seriously.
Right.
And that's the shame, because there are opportunities. I heard, this is not my idea; it was something that I read, but that if you really wanted an Apollo type program that would address a major problem that we have here here back on Earth, is that if you send a group of rovers up to the moon, and you attach to the base of those rovers a microwave, and you microwave the regolith on the lunar soil, you create glass. And then you could send crews to outfit that glass to become a huge solar farm. And so in 10 years' time, you could have enough energy to be sending back to Earth, to transferring back to Earth, to solve energy problems in the United States. You wouldn't have to rely on fossil fuels any longer, if that was a fully funded, invested program. But you talk about that to the average individual, and they don't see it as a serious opportunity. And there are a lot of hurdles, real hurdles between us doing that and it being a reality. But it's hurdles that I think we could overcome. I think the technology exists. It's a money issue and it's a will issue. It's, do we have the will to do it?
How do we help people get the will to do it? How do we ignite the passion within them and say, yes, this is something that's important. This is something that we need to do, and I'm not going to stand by and let us just do LEO anymore. Let's fix this. Let's make this happen. What do we need to do to make that work?
Unfortunately, short of an asteroid coming straight at Earth or the discovery of life on another planet within reach, and even microbiological life, that's what I'm talking about, not little green men. But short of those two, I don't see a space race. There's a lot of hope for, we have to, even just up on Congress, we heard about, how important it is to have Americans get back to the moon before China gets there. Mm-hmm. Well, first, China is on the record of wanting to spend the next decade working on space stations. And so they are not looking at sending humans to the moon at least not publicly on the record, of wanting to send humans to the moon sooner than we are looking at ourselves, even under the fiscal 2011 budget and proposal by the president. But more to the point, I don't know if the American public that exists today sees China as the threat that the population in the 1960s saw as the Soviet Union being a threat. It's not the same. It doesn't hold the same fear that of being beat that it once did.
Right.
One of the great things I like about the commercial space industry is because there is a space race there. It'll be the race between American companies as to who can get astronauts to the International Space Station first. And I think it's one story that hasn't really been tapped into by NASA or by the media or by anyone, about how that is a space race. It's a space race amongst companies to be the first to become the new American spacecraft into space. The good thing about that race is that you have multiple winners. Once you have the first one go up, then you have multiples that can follow them. But it's still a race, and it captures some of the excitement that existed when the X Prize was first offered, and you saw multiple companies from around the world and organizations around the world competing for that prize. Mm-hmm. The same thing true with like the Northrop Grumman Lunar Landing Challenge, seeing multiple companies come out, or even father and son teams come out and compete for that money. I think that's one of the more exciting parts about getting commercial space industry involved. But it's not a story that's being told.
What if X Prize Foundation did a prize for putting humans on the moon? What if they said, you know what, not just rovers? I mean, rovers is a great first step, baby steps, right? You don't just put humans on the moon.
No. Why don't they just do a prize for people who are covering people who are putting rovers on the moon?
Yeah, I'll take that prize. But no, what if they did a prize for putting humans on the moon? Do you think that would garner interest at that point?
I don't think. Unfortunately, I don't know if they could raise the amount of money that would be needed to offer as the prize for that. I know that there was a prize, the America's Prize, that was proposed by the Bigelow Corporation. I don't know. I think that now is over. There was and of course the Google Lunar X Prize is a great first step. I do have one minor issue with the Google Lunar X Prize, in that they have a heritage bonus prize of landing a rover within, or roving a rover over to where it can image and send back HD video of Apollo sites. And I think there needs to be a lot of care taken in doing that. There are some sites, there are some hardware that it would be, more than welcome to rove up to and image. There's others where I don't know if I feel comfortable with having an experimental vehicle rolling around in what is really history's footsteps. Mm-hmm. But that's no reason to discourage the prize. I think it's a great project, and it really is igniting interest, not just on the professional level, but on the hobbyist and enthusiast level too, because anyone could really step out of the woodwork and develop one of these, develop a winning prize. When we saw the X Prize going, not the original X Prize, the Ansari X Prize, mm-hmm. Not all the competitors were big aerospace companies or even moderate-sized aerospace companies. Mm-hmm. Some were startups, and even though they never got to space, it was a good step forward. It brought their community, it made their community aware of space exploration, and that's always good.
Right.
Robert, I want to close with this. How cool is it that we live in a time where we have to worry about disturbing the old Apollo landing sites with our new stuff that we're putting on the moon? No, seriously, I mean, you go back 20 years, that wouldn't even been a thought and going through anyone's head. But now we have to think about how are we going to preserve our old landing sites as we send next-gen stuff to the moon. And that's a very valid point, but it's something really cool because we have to think about this stuff.
It is. As Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has been sending back imagery of the Apollo sites from orbit, it's really been surreal to see some of these sites. Just recently, they sent back a picture of the Apollo 13 S4B impact site. Mm-hmm. This was the third stage of the Saturn V. It's the only piece of Apollo 13 to actually make it to the moon, because, as famously know, Apollo 13 had an explosion and came back to Earth, and see the Tom Hanks movie for the rest. But this piece fulfilled that part of the mission and was impacted with the moon so that it could calibrate seismic instruments that were left by the Apollo 12 mission. Mm-hmm. And now we get to see that impact crater, and it's the first time that we're seeing that. Mm-hmm. And it brings alive the the nostalgia and the romanticism of the Apollo program at the same time is promising the future of when we'll be able to not just see it from the eyes of a robotic probe looking down, but hopefully robotic probes on the surface, and then eventually, and then followed, hopefully not too long after, humans seeing it with their own eyes, and then not too long after that, hopefully me seeing it with my own 2 eyes.
Right.
So, and you and everyone else who's watching.
That's the goal. That's, make space commonplace for everyone. Let's push humanity out to the star. All right, Robert, stay with us. We're going to come back to you in post-show, and we're going to look at some more of the cool stuff that you've got hanging out, because you've got quite the collection. Probably second to none. I mean, it's really cool. You're showing...
He lends stuff to the Smithsonian. Hello?
That's just
Anyone?
cool. That's just cool. I can't compete with that. So stay with us. We'll be back with you shortly. Everyone else, I did want to say... help us out. Spacevidcast Epic is what allows us to do these shows. It allows us to do some of the really cool stuff we're going to be doing, hopefully going to ISTC 2010, also going to other events throughout the year and broadcasting them live to you so that we can help bring space to you so you don't have to go to everything. And, truly making space commonplace, educating and entertaining and getting the information out there. Because at the heart of it, everyone really is interested about this, these topics and this stuff. So it starts at about $8.33, and check it out. I have a new promo video. Here
What?
you go. Yeah, I know.
No, you didn't.
Oh, yeah, I
No.
did. More information available at spacevidcast.com/epic. It's what helps pay for this show. It's what helps us make space commonplace and bring everything that's cool to you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Join us in post-show. If you've got Epic, you'll be able to watch it on demand. We'll see you guys next week. Oh, wait, don't dissolve. Who's our guest next week?
Who's our guest next week?
Ed Buckbeak. Apogee Books got us Ed, who was PAO during the Gemini Mercury Apollo days. And
He wrote the book Space Cowboys.
Space Cowboys. He'll be our guest next week. I almost forgot. How dare I forget? I'm a terrible human being. And when we come back in post-show, we'll ask Robert what his favorite orbiter is. Thank you guys so much for watching. Now we'll see you next week.